sweeties, how are you doing? Welcome to Naya Sim, and thank you all so much for all the love and support. So today we'll be talking something very important, and it's about Tucker Carlson, who actually came out to say some insensitive things about George Floyd. I know for sure that Tucker Carlson does not like people that look like me, but I think this is very insensitive of him coming out to tell us that what happened to George Floyd wasn't because Derek Chauvin was the cop who unalived George Floyd. So he is telling us that the cop had got nothing to do with George Floyd's death, that it was because he overdosed on drug. That was why he died. And it is just amazing how people come out to be very, very insensitive and say some nasty things. I know for sure that he doesn't like black people, but this is uncalled for, you know? And with everything that happened that day, I mean, you all saw the video of how George Floyd was unalived and everything, and somebody got the guts to come out on television to lie about this. I mean, Tucker Carlson, I think you should get a life and stop going around lying. And you all remember what happened to last 2 weeks. What happened to that Derek Chauvin? Okay, if Derek Chauvin did not do anything, why is he in prison? Why is he in prison? You all remember what happened to him 2 weeks ago? He was Pe0ple in the prison. Let's get into this video.
Did, for example, a racist white cop actually murder a man called George Floyd, a civil rights leader, in Minneapolis on Memorial Day of 2020? And the answer is, well, no.
Did Tucker Carlson, one of the most watched men in America, lie his ass off so egregiously that it took me 1 Google search and 3 results to find every source I needed? Oh, what else is new? I mean, outside of us literally fucking seeing what happened, I'm starting to use this as a gauge for one's connection to reality based off how literally open and shut this case was. Let's get busy. I'm about to eat through your shit.
He didn't murder George Floyd. We're not guessing about that. We know it conclusively, thanks to a new court case now underway in Hennepin County, Minnesota. In her deposition, which you should read, Amy Sweezy describes a conversation that she had with the county medical examiner, Andrew Baker, right after George Floyd died. Quote, I called Dr. Baker early that morning to tell him about the case and to ask him if he would perform the autopsy on Mr. Floyd. He called me later in the day on that Tuesday, and he told me that there were no medical findings that showed any injury to the vital structures of Mr. Floyd's neck. There were no medical indications of asphyxia or strangulation. In other words, George Floyd, according to the official autopsy, was not murdered. He died instead of what we used to call natural causes, which in his case would include decades of drug use, as well as the fatal concentration of fentanyl that was in his system on his final day.
He was the most watched. 1, let's assume that you're right and he actually died of an overdose and he put this cause of death in the autopsy report to lie about it. What would the rationale behind that be? Well, JJ, he obviously put that cause of death in the autopsy because if he had kept it honest and not lied to fit the media narrative, everyone would have gone crazy. But isn't the only thing y'all talk about from 2020 the rioting and the looting that happened anyway? How are you to argue to me that they were so intimidated by the public pressure that they lied in the autopsy report to stop a catastrophe from happening, but according to you guys' metric, the catastrophe happened?
What happens when the actual evidence doesn't match up with the public narrative that everyone's already decided on? And then he said, quote, this is the kind of case that ends career. In other words, everyone lied about it from the very beginning.
Well, no, you see, he was trying to save his career, like he said, as this is the type of case that destroys careers. So he put that result in the autopsy to give people a reason to protest and save his own skin. Source, I made it the fuck up. But let's explain what you have to believe in order to believe that. Despite this deposition that Carlson cites being the concrete proof and the definitive proof that George Floyd actually was not murdered, you'd have to believe that the person who conducted the autopsy and Sweezy had this conversation that has come out now, and nowhere in it can be found the words fentanyl or overdose. In order to believe this, you'd also have to believe that the preliminary findings of the autopsy that came out the same day this conversation happened doesn't actually contain the part right after the sentence where it says the autopsy revealed no physical findings that support a diagnosis of traumatic asphyxia or strangulation, where it says the combined effects of Mr. Floyd being restrained by the police, his underlying health conditions, and any potential intoxicants in his system likely contributed contributed to his death. You'd also have to believe that a full autopsy didn't come out after this that ruled it a homicide with more complete information, on top of the private autopsy that was conducted on Floyd's body that also ruled it a homicide. You'd also have to ignore the fact that in response to this deposition that Carlson is using as the smoking gun, the office spokesperson for Andrew Baker, the person who conducted the official autopsy, says that he can't speak for people's statements in their depositions and that he still stands by what his ruling was on the cause of death and his televised testimony. Because, public pressure. 3 years later. You'd also have to believe that when Dr. Andrew Baker said this,
what I clarified for the U.S. Attorney and the Federal Bureau of Investigation was my opinion as to what happened to Mr. Floyd, and that is he experienced a cardiopulmonary arrest in the context of law enforcement's dual restraint and neck compression. It was the stress of that interaction that tipped him over the edge, given his underlying heart disease and his toxicological status. That was also clarified in a letter from the Hennepin County Attorney to the U.S. Attorney, I want to say within a few days of that meeting, because of the confusion around how that meeting was run and the way those questions were asked.
It wasn't his professional opinion. He lied to the court and to the U.S. Attorney General because public pressure.
And so if we look at the other contributing conditions, those other contributing conditions are not conditions that you consider direct causes. Is that true?
They are not direct causes of Mr. Floyd's death, that's true. They're contributing causes.
And in terms of manner of death, you found then, and do you stand by today, that the manner of death for Mr. Floyd was, as you would call it, homicide?
Yes, I would still classify it as a homicide today.
He lied again because of public pressure. You also have to believe that in his testimony, when he acknowledges his shortcomings, being that he operates mainly on dead people, and in order to get a grasp on what fentanyl does to the live body, you need to get someone else's expertise, and he deferred to other experts. Then they called Dr. Martin Tobin, a lung and critical care specialist, to testify, and he said this.
So that was roughly a 17-second clip, and you counted 7 or 8 breaths?
Between 7 and 8, yeah.
And did you use this to calculate a rate of respiration?
Yes, because it's simple. Once you have 19 seconds and you count out the number of breaths you have here, that will come out at a respiratory rate of 22.
Is that number, the respiratory rate of 22, significant to this case?
It's extremely significant.
Why is that?
The question of fentanyl. And if fentanyl is having an effect and is causing depression of the respiratory centers, the centers that control breathing, that's going to result in a decrease in the respiratory rate. And it's shown that with fentanyl, you expect a 40% reduction in the respiratory rate. So with fentanyl, his respiratory rate should be down at around 10. Instead of that, it's right in the middle of normal at 22.
It must have just been a fucking coincidence, and then they were all lying about it because they were scared of... Tucker Carlson isn't my concern here. We know he's a paid liar. My concern is just how many people genuinely believe this shit and fall for propaganda that's this dog shit because they want to. But it's worth asking yourself why one of the most watched men in America would come on TV, come on the internet, and cap his ass off about a death that we all saw in front of our eyes, so much as to utter the words.
Did, for example, a racist white cop actually murder a man called George Floyd, a civil rights leader, in Minneapolis on Memorial Day of 2020? And the answer is, well, no.
Knowing how big of a lie that is, it means so much to millions of people that the police couldn't have done anything wrong here and that he brought it upon himself or that he deserved it or that he didn't actually get murdered. Precisely because it shields everyone who watches them from thinking that maybe I could be wrong. Maybe they have a point. Because once that gets through, you start asking a lot more fucking questions that Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens and Ben Shapiro and Michael Knowles, etc. would not want you to be asking. Good day.
Well, y'all, looks like Lil Tuckum is at it again. I swear, man, this dude despises black people. I mean, to the core. I mean, his ass probably don't even like chocolate ice cream. And dare I say, he probably wishes that ice cream sandwiches were segregated. But I digress. Here it is. Press play.
These riots of 2020, of course, were never about George Floyd. Obviously, that's why there are no statues of him in American cities.
Yeah, that part. Y'all, since we talking statues, really, to get one in this country, basically all you have to do is do something god-awful to black people. Case in point, Nathaniel Bedford Forrest. You see, he got a statue for killing 300 black soldiers during the Civil War. Hell, you even can be the worst of the worst and still get a statue in this country. Case in point, J. Marion Sims, who performed surgery on enslaved black women without anesthesia. And then there was good old Robert. You know, Robert E. Lee, the general who led the Confederate States Army in the Civil War. Yeah, that dude. The slave owner, if you would, who fought to perpetuate slavery in the 1860s and beyond. And not only does he have a statue, but thousands of children are educated at schools named after him. Robert E. Lee actually has a day, and it is celebrated. It is celebrated in a handful of states today. Go figure, right? Oh, and Tuckum, by the way, George Floyd does have a bust in New York's Union Square and a big ass statue in Newark, New Jersey's City Hall. Yeah, Lil Tuckum, don't let the door hit you with a good Lord split you. And those would be facts on facts on facts. Carry on.
Did, for example, a racist white cop actually murder a man called George Floyd? And the answer is, well, no, he didn't murder George.
No, he did, actually. Hey, Tucker. Yeah, I've already talked about this twice. He was definitely murdered by Derek Chauvin.
And he told me that there were no medical findings that showed any injury to the vital structures of Mr. Floyd's neck. There were no medical indications of asphyxia or strangulation.
That doesn't mean he didn't die from asphyxiation. That just means there weren't any visible signs of it on his body. Dr. Gregory Davis told the Associated Press in June 2020 that bruising or damage to the neck doesn't in any way mean that asphyxia didn't occur, only that there are no signs of it on the body.
In other words, George Floyd, according to the official autopsy, was not murdered.
Nope, the autopsy makes things pretty clear. Here's the autopsy where it specifies that his heart attack was quite literally a result of law enforcement subdual. So, yeah, it was because of the police.
He died instead of what we used to call natural causes, which in his case would include decades of drug use, as well as the fatal concentration of fentanyl.
So like I said, I've responded to this claim twice before, so I think I'm going to link to those two videos in the caption, where I talk about how there is no such thing as a fatal drug overdose because it's dependent on many different factors, and this is something that all the medical examiners were aware of, and they still ruled this a homicide. And they did so, one, because there's no indications that George Floyd died of an overdose of any kind, and two, because under the conditions, any healthy person would have died in that situation. So yeah, definitely was not a drug overdose. Can we shut the fuck up with this?
Amy, what happens when the actual evidence doesn't match up with the public narrative that everyone's already decided on? And then he said, quote, "This is the kind of case that ends careers."
You know, this might seem like a pretty damning conversation, but it's kind of ignoring the fact that there are several pages of redacted documents immediately following and preceding this conversation, and there's no indication as to the overall context and where exactly the statement was brought up. So, yeah.
So this is all I got from this, and it is just amazing how Tucker Carlson all of a sudden jumps out from nowhere to start telling people or start reminding people what happened to George Floyd. Like we were not eyewitnesses, like we did not see what happened, like we were all blind when it happened. If the cops was not the one that unalived George Floyd, why was he sentenced? Why is he still in prison till this very moment? And you all remember what happened to him some weeks, probably 2 weeks ago. What happened to him in prison? I mean, somebody from nowhere brought out something and, shook him all over. And somebody from nowhere is out there trying to defend Derek. His name is Derek Chauvin, right? Yeah. So, it is just crazy. I know for sure that Tucker Carlson does not like people that look like me. I know that for sure. But coming out to lie about George Floyd's death, it's very insensitive of him. It's more like telling us that we don't know anything. It's more like telling us that we are dumb, because when everything happened, we all saw what happened. The video was very clear. And how come somebody was shocked, and now you want to tell us that it was drugs, because all you all know how to do is to gaslight black people and look for a way to lie about black people. And now all you want to say is that it was because he did drugs. Which drugs did he do? That you all, in broad daylight, a cop did what he did to that young man that took his life. I mean, you all can look for another lie, some sort of lie to tell. But this one is like, trying to pour salt on an injury. Trying to remind us what happened to George Floyd, and also trying to tell us that we are stupid because what happened wasn't real. I mean, the autopsy showed something else, and you are saying something else. Carry on, man. I mean, but then, that is Tucker Carlson. See you all in my next video. Bye for now.